Picture, if you will, the Trilateral Commerce Zone, a delightfully pretentious name for what amounts to the galaxy's most profitable protection racket. Here, three major powers had spent the better part of 2 centuries perfecting the art of civilized exploitation while maintaining the veneer of diplomatic sophistication that made everyone feel better about themselves. The Vorthak Empire controlled the mining rights to 17 systems, their reptilian sensibilities perfectly suited to the patient extraction of resources in the occasional diplomat who asked too many questions. The Selenian Confederacy, those crystalline beings who communicated through harmonic frequencies, had cornered the market on quantum computing matrices. Meanwhile, the Nexari Collective, imagine if accountants evolved from hive insects and developed a taste for bureaucracy, managed the shipping lanes with the kind of obsessive efficiency that made profit margins sing. Together, they'd created what political scientists called a stable equilibrium, and what everyone else recognized as an elaborate shell game where the house always won. The beauty of their system lay not in its fairness, perish the thought, but in its predictability. Disputes were handled through carefully choreographed diplomatic theater. Trade negotiations followed scripts refined over decades. Even assassinations adhered to proper protocols, with the understanding that losing an ambassador was simply the cost of doing business in a civilized galaxy. Into this well-oiled machine of mutual exploitation stumbled humanity, fresh from their little blue planet and radiating the kind of earnest optimism that made seasoned diplomats reach for antacids. The humans had been granted provisional membership in the zone 18 months prior, a status roughly equivalent to being allowed to watch the adults play poker while contributing snacks. Ambassador Dmitri Volkov had been their representative, a soft-spoken man with the unfortunate habit of asking uncomfortable questions about shipping manifests and mining quotas. He possessed that peculiarly human trait of treating diplomatic courtesy as if it meant something, rather than recognizing it as the elaborate kabuki theater it actually was. Which brings us to last Tuesday, when Ambassador Volkov made the fatal error of questioning certain discrepancies in rare earth mineral exports during what should have been a routine trade negotiation on Vorthak Prime. The Vorthak delegate, a charming fellow named Sektar, who collected diplomatic immunity violations like some species collected stamps, decided that the humans' persistence warranted a more permanent solution. The murder itself was almost disappointingly conventional, a neural disruptor to the back of the head, while Volkov reviewed shipping documents in his quarters. Clean, efficient, and according to centuries of galactic precedent, entirely within the acceptable parameters of diplomatic discourse. Sektar filed the appropriate paperwork, citing regrettable but necessary action to preserve trade stability. The Selenians hummed their formal condolences in B-flat minor. The Nexari updated their actuarial tables to reflect the statistical probability of future human diplomatic casualties. Everyone agreed it was terribly sad, of course, but these things happened when newcomers failed to understand the delicate balance of interstellar commerce. The Vorthak Empire's official statement arrived with all the sincerity of a tax collector's smile. The unfortunate incident involving the human representative resulted from a misunderstanding regarding proper diplomatic protocols. We express our regret and suggest that future human ambassadors receive appropriate cultural sensitivity training. Cultural sensitivity training. The galaxy's diplomatic corps found this particularly amusing. What they found considerably less amusing was humanity's response, which arrived not through the usual channels of strongly worded communiques and appeals to galactic arbitration courts, but in the form of every single human citizen, contractor, and automated system vanishing from trilateral space within 72 hours. The evacuation was so thorough it bordered on the supernatural. Human technicians maintaining Selenian quantum matrices simply didn't report for their shifts. Human cargo pilots failed to file their flight plans. Even the automated human trading algorithms went dark, leaving behind only politely worded messages explaining that their services were no longer available due to philosophical differences regarding workplace safety. The three powers initially treated this as a minor inconvenience. Surely the humans would return once they realized how the galaxy actually worked. After all, they needed the trade relationships more than anyone else. This confidence lasted exactly 6 days until Captain Elena Vasquez arrived. She didn't announce herself with the usual diplomatic fanfare. No formal request for audience, no elaborate ceremonies of state. Instead, human fleets simply materialized at the edge of all three powers' core systems simultaneously, broadcasting a message so brief it could have fit on a business card. We need to talk. Captain Vasquez herself was everything the galaxy's diplomatic establishment found unsettling about humans. Direct, unimpressed by ceremony, and possessed of the kind of smile that suggested she knew several things you really wish she didn't. When the Vorthak demanded to know by what authority she presumed to enter their space uninvited, her response was a masterpiece of understated menace. The same authority you used to kill our ambassador. The Selenians attempted to mediate, their harmonic frequencies conveying the usual platitudes about misunderstandings and the need for measured responses. Vasquez listened politely, then asked if they'd prefer to discuss reparations before or after she demonstrated humanity's recent advances in quantum matrix disruption technology. The Nexari, ever practical, ran the numbers and discovered something that made their collective consciousness break out in what could charitably be called a cold sweat. During their 18 months of learning the ropes, the humans had been mapping everything: trade routes, infrastructure dependencies, communication networks, even the personal schedules of key officials. While the three powers had been congratulating themselves on teaching the newcomers how galactic politics really worked, the humans had been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence operation in the zone's history. They knew which Vorthak mining stations depended on Selenian computers, which Nexari shipping routes required human-maintained navigation beacons, and exactly how many hours each system could function independently. The answer, as it turned out, was not very many. Captain Vasquez's final message to the Trilateral leadership was delivered with the kind of professional courtesy that made seasoned diplomats nostalgic for the days when threats came with proper dramatic flair. You have 48 hours to produce Ambassador Volkov's killer and agree to our terms. After that, we'll be forced to conclude that you consider his death an acceptable cost of doing business. We'll adjust our business practices accordingly. The three powers spent those 48 hours doing what they did best: calling emergency sessions, forming committees to study the crisis, and drafting strongly worded responses that would surely make the humans see reason. They were still drafting when the humans began their demonstration of how diplomacy actually worked. The humans began their education program at precisely 0800 Galactic Standard Time, because apparently even interstellar retribution operated on a schedule. The first lesson involved the Nexari Collective's primary shipping hub at Kepler Station, a marvel of bureaucratic efficiency that processed roughly 60% of the zone's cargo traffic. Captain Vasquez's fleet didn't destroy it, which would have been crude and temporary. Instead, they introduced a series of cascading system failures that turned the galaxy's most sophisticated logistics network into an expensive piece of abstract art. Navigation computers began routing cargo ships to scenic but commercially useless nebulae. Automated custom systems started classifying luxury goods as hazardous waste and quarantining them indefinitely. The station's AI developed what could only be described as selective amnesia, forgetting the access codes of every non-human vessel while maintaining perfect recall for ships that no longer existed. The Nexari's frantic attempts to regain control revealed the uncomfortable truth that their foolproof systems had been quietly upgraded by helpful human technicians over the past 18 months. Every patch, every optimization, every minor improvement had included what programmers euphemistically called undocumented features. While the collective's best minds struggled with their own infrastructure, the Selenians discovered that quantum matrices were remarkably sensitive to harmonic interference. The humans had apparently spent considerable time studying Selenian communication frequencies because they began broadcasting a signal that didn't damage the crystalline being's computers. It simply made them incredibly, persistently confused. Selenian quantum processors started calculating trade routes to parallel dimensions, generating shipping manifests for cargo that existed only in theoretical mathematics, and producing financial reports that were technically accurate but described economic conditions in universes where the laws of physics worked differently. The Confederacy's attempts to shut down the affected systems only spread the confusion, like a virus that fed on their own attempts to cure it. The Vorthak Empire, watching their partner's systematic humiliation, made the tactical error of assuming their more traditional military approach would prove superior. They dispatched 3 battle fleets to restore order and discovered that humans had developed some fascinating theories about asteroid mining. It turned out that when you spent months mapping mining operations, you learned interesting things about structural integrity and explosive placement. The Vorthak fleets found themselves navigating asteroid fields that had been carefully rearranged into geometric patterns, spelling out extremely rude suggestions in 17 different languages. Their mining stations didn't explode. They simply stopped being economically viable as their carefully planned extraction operations became elaborate sculptures. Captain Vasquez maintained regular communication throughout these demonstrations, her updates delivered with the cheerful professionalism of a customer service representative explaining billing changes. The Kepler station situation should resolve itself once proper diplomatic protocols are observed, she noted while Nexari cargo ships continued their scenic tours of empty space. We're confident that our Selenian partners will appreciate the expanded computational possibilities we provided, she added as their quantum matrices calculated the probability of purple existing as a number. The 3 powers' response followed predictable patterns. The Vorthak demanded immediate cessation of hostilities and threatened military retaliation. The Selenians composed elaborate harmonic appeals to reason and galactic law. The Nexari calculated the economic impact and promptly fainted, which was impressive for a hive mind. What none of them did was produce sectar or acknowledge that killing ambassadors might have consequences. So the humans escalated to advanced coursework. The second phase targeted the zone's communication networks, which had the unfortunate characteristic of being entirely dependent on relay stations that humans had helped maintain. The galaxy's diplomatic corps discovered that their carefully encrypted messages were being delivered with small editorial additions. Footnotes, really, providing helpful context about the sender's previous statements and actions. When the Vorthak High Command sent encrypted orders to their fleet commanders, the messages arrived with attached historical documents detailing their species' previous diplomatic murders. Selenian trade negotiations found themselves supplemented with audio recordings of their private discussions about managing the human problem. Nexari internal communications gained appendices calculating the statistical probability that their current approach would result in complete economic collapse. The humans had turned the galaxy's own communication system into a fact-checking service with a sense of humor and access to everyone's dirty laundry. By the end of the first week, the Trilateral Commerce Zone had effectively ceased to exist as a functioning economic entity. The 3 powers found themselves dealing with infrastructure that obeyed human priorities, communication systems that provided unwanted transparency, and the growing realization that their primitive new partners had been playing an entirely different game. 6 months later, the entity formerly known as the Trilateral Commerce Zone had been rechristened the Human Protected Trade Corridor, a name that managed to be both diplomatically polite and subtly threatening, a combination that humans had apparently perfected along with everything else. The Vorthak Empire now held the status of regional mining contractor, which sounded impressive until you realized it meant they required human approval for major extraction operations. The Selenian Confederacy had become Associate Computational Partners, a title that came with excellent benefits and the understanding that their quantum matrices would be monitored for signs of confusion. The Nexari Collective retained their shipping operations under the designation Logistics Coordination Specialists, which was accurate if you ignored the fact that humans now controlled the coordination part. Sectar, incidentally, had been delivered to human authorities within 72 hours of the communications network gaining its editorial features. Apparently, having your private conversations about diplomatic murder broadcasts to your own government tended to erode job security rather quickly. The new human embassy occupied the former Trilateral Council chambers, a bit of architectural irony that nobody mentioned, but everyone noticed. Ambassador Chen Wei, Volkov's replacement, possessed the same unsettling human trait of treating diplomatic courtesy as if it meant something, but with the added advantage of representing a species that had recently demonstrated their approach to workplace safety violations. His inaugural address to the Reformed Trade Council was a masterpiece of diplomatic understatement. We look forward to a productive relationship based on mutual respect and the understanding that some business practices are simply unacceptable in civilized commerce. The galaxy's diplomatic establishment had spent considerable time analyzing humanity's rapid rise from junior partners to regional hegemon, searching for the strategic principles that had enabled such an efficient transition. The consensus among political scientists was that humans had introduced an entirely new paradigm to interstellar relations. The radical concept that actions might have consequences proportional to their severity rather than their diplomatic convenience. This insight was considered so profound that several universities had established entire departments to study applied human diplomatic theory, which was really just a fancy way of saying, don't kill people's ambassadors unless you're prepared for the follow-up conversation. The three former powers had adapted to their new circumstances with varying degrees of grace. The Vorthak grumbled but appreciated the improved efficiency of their operations under human oversight. The Selenians found that their quantum matrices worked considerably better when not being used to calculate the profitability of murder. The Nexari, ever practical, had updated their actuarial tables to reflect the new reality and discovered that honest business practices were surprisingly profitable when everyone was required to engage in them. Captain Vasquez had returned to human space, but her parting message remained posted in the embassy's main hall. Diplomacy works best when everyone understands the rules. We're happy to provide clarification as needed. The galaxy had indeed taught humanity how interstellar politics really worked. The lesson had been received, processed, and implemented with characteristic human efficiency. The three powers had wanted to demonstrate the acceptable parameters of diplomatic discourse, and they had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. Congratulations were in order, really. After all, there's nothing quite like a successful educational program, especially when the students prove so remarkably apt at applying what they've learned. The universe, as it turned out, had quite a sense of humor about species who mistook patience for weakness and courtesy for vulnerability. The humans had learned their lesson perfectly. In galactic politics, the species with the most comprehensive understanding of everyone else's infrastructure tends to write the rules. Everything else was just paperwork.